Now that our website is functionally complete, we'll go through some steps and some styling practices to get it looking like the final product. So most of our, or all of our elements are in place at this point, but we do have some styling issues we want to address here. One of the major ones is if you're viewing our website with a large screen size, we get just gigantic sections here. So if I hit F12 for the dev tools and we have a 1700 pixel wide screen, we get these giant spaces in here, and the image is just absolutely monstrous, along with the skills images and the About Me section. Just overwhelming. Now I have my resolution turned way up on my screen so you can see everything. So it's a little crowded here, but you can see that there's just massive amounts of space. So one thing we can do to combat this is put a container around all of our sections and then limit the width of those containers to an industry standard size. So typically it's recommended you limit your container width to 1200 pixels. So the actual content, the important content, is limited to 1200 pixels. So there's a margin on the sides for larger screen sizes. So let's go ahead and do that, and I'll demonstrate what happens here in the dev tools. So let's go to our hero first, because that has the most impact. That's the most obvious component. And we will add a div to the outside of everything called outer container. And we'll put all of our HTML elements inside of that container. And then we will go to our CSS and select our outer container. And we will limit the width to 1200 pixels. So if we deploy that, we should see the shortening of our component. So go back to Experience Builder, refresh. We can see, I wish I had more screen space. We can see that everything's been shortened, but it's now to the left. So now we need to center the contents of our container. So an easy way to do that is to use margins. So we'll do margin 0. So this is for the top and bottom margins. It'll be 0. And then auto. So to put the margins around the empty space on the sides, on the left and right. So let's go ahead and deploy this source to org. And refresh our Experience Builder. And now the container's been minified, it's been made more skinny, but also pulled into the middle. So let's go ahead and do that to the rest of our components, the nav bar, the skills section, and the About Me section. And then I will turn my resolution to a normal size so you can kind of see what that does to the overall website. So let's go ahead and go to the Nav menu. Once again, create an outer container. And let's get the tabbing right. There we go. And I'm just going to grab the CSS from here since it's going to be the same. Just add that to the top. Save that. And let's just go rapid fire and do everything. So outer container. Save that and grab our CSS, put it on the top. And one more, just the About Me section, which starts with A, so it's at the top. Okay, so now all of our items should be the same width. Let's go ahead and deploy that. That's up arrow. Project deploy start. Okay. Oh, it has a conflict. So we must have done something. Okay, this is a good time to show you guys the DashC. This overrides conflicts that you have. So if you made changes in your Salesforce org that don't line up with what you've done in Visual Studio Code, you can do this -C, which will just force it to update with what's in Visual Studio Code, which is generally what I want. Your VS Code files are the source of truth. Okay. Let's go ahead and refresh this. And now you can see the space on the sides. Everything's a little skinnier. So this will look a lot better on large screen sizes. So let's go back to, let's get out of DevTools because this is a pretty horrendous view. So in our preview, at this screen size, it doesn't look much different. Let's see if I can change my display settings to make this a little bit more reasonable. Let's just go to 100% on a 1080p monitor. And you can see now there's space on the sides, and this looks a lot better. Okay, so let's go back so we can write code legibly. Let's go back and change our display settings. Crank that font size way back up. Little peek behind the curtain here, how I set things up. At this point, let's just kind of open up the local development server and look for some small things we can tweak to make this look a little better. So if I go to, start with a hero again, if I open the local component preview, let's put that on one side. And we're going to have to make this a little bit bigger. So we want to get this into side-by-side mode. I would say text size here looks pretty good. I think our spacing between the secondary paragraph and the contact me can use some work, and this button is way too small for this screen size. So let's work on the button first, and then work on the spacing. So let's go ahead and go back to Visual Studio Code. And if you recall, that Contact Me button is actually in its own LWC component. So in order to modify that, we have to go into the Contact Me button component. And this is the button that launches our contact dialog. Oh, I'm sorry, this is the form. Sorry, down here. This is the button that launches our contact dialog. You can see the on-click handler is mapped to the show dialog function. So we need to give this a class so we can reference it. So let's give this a class called launch button. And then in our CSS, we can go add a launch button selector. And let's go ahead and change the width. So at the big screen size, we can see that the button's not very big. So let's do the width a percentage. So let's say 40%. I think it's pretty safe. So if we do 40%, on the smaller screen sizes, that looks pretty good. So I like that. And then here, this looks much better as a reasonable size to not get drowned out by the rest of the call to action. So I like that. That looks good. I would also say that the text of the button is maybe a little small. Let's look at that again. Could be a little bit bigger, especially on the big screen sizes. So let's go ahead and change that to font size 18 pixels, just a little bit bigger than the standard 16. Okay, doesn't make much of a difference, but it looks pretty good. I think we leave that alone. Okay, so let's go ahead and I also like to give all the buttons a little bit of a border radius. On the image here, we've been using the 5 pixel border radius, so let's just add that to keep consistent. 5 pixels. Save that. Subtle changes. And then, yeah, it's looking pretty good. I think that's actually, well, I guess we need to change the margin at this point. So, oh, I've been putting these on the wrong. Okay, let's go ahead and handle the margin. There's a lot of ways to do this, but since we're already in the launch button selector, I'll just put a margin top on this. And let's say 15 pixels to get it a little further away from the let's do business together text above it. There we go, a little bit more space. That looks pretty nice. I also think maybe let's make the text a little bit bigger in that button. We can go font size 18 pixels, just slightly bigger than the standard 16. Yeah, I think that looks a little nicer. And then let's give the corners a little bit of a radius, just like the image here. We use the 5 pixel radius on the or on the image. So let's call let's do border radius 5 pixels. Okay, so that looks starting to look pretty good. Let's see what it looks like in the bigger. Yeah, I like that. Now, while we're on the topic of the button, typically you don't have a plain colored button in a call to action. You want it to be a color that stands out. So this is a good opportunity to talk about the styling hooks that Salesforce offers. So I've got a link here to the list of styling hooks. And this is specifically the color styling hooks. They also have styling hooks for the font size and the spacing. And those are things that you can set in the Experience Builder. In a later video, I'll go more in depth on how to use that to let non-coding people change some of the features of your website. But for right now, we're only interested in the colors. So let's go ahead and scroll down and I'll show you how these things work. So in this case, we want to let's use the brand colors for our button. So you can see that the background of the button is this number 1, which goes to DXPG brand. So I'll show you how that works. Let's just copy that variable name. And these are just CSS variables. So if we go to the contact, or I guess we're already in here. Let's give ourselves some more space here, along with our development server. Although I don't think you can see this until you get to Experience Builder. So let's go ahead and say background color is equal to var parenthesis, and that's the name of the variable, or what Salesforce calls design hooks, but it's just a CSS variable that holds the color. So hit save there. I don't actually think it's going to update anything in the preview window here. So we'll go to the Experience Builder and see the effects. Okay, yeah, it didn't do anything. So let's go ahead and just deploy this. And we'll open up Experience Builder. Okay, so in Experience Builder, if I refresh, you can see now it's that blue color, which is a little nicer. But now the problem is we have the Contact Me right here is a dark non-contrasting color. So we go back to the styling hooks to find something that contrasts with that. And that's number 2, which is more of a white color in this case. So we'll grab that variable and we will modify our CSS to set the color, which ends up being the text color in this case, to that variable. So var and then the variable name. Now if we deploy that, we should see a better contrast. Okay, let's go back to Experience Builder, refresh. And sure enough, it looks much better. That's a nice, colorful, attractive button. While we're here in the hero section, typically I've heard it recommended that since we read English left to right, that your text should be on the left side. So the text and the call to action you want to draw attention to first should be on the left side, and your image should be on the right side. So let's go ahead and modify the way our layout works to make that possible. So I'm going to open up the hero section again here. So in this case, we have the outer container and then our 2 containers underneath. And if I remember right, in our CSS, we took this from W3 Schools. So I think they're using a float here, if I remember right. Yeah, so when the screen size gets larger, we start floating our items. So I prefer to use Flexbox instead of float when doing the flexible columns, the multiple columns. So let's go ahead and take this float out. And since we have the outer container, I guess we can open up the local dev server while we're doing this. Although it'll be hard to see. Okay, so now that we have that, we can say outer container. And we can change the display to flex, which should maintain our 2 columns. And it does. So we still have our 2 columns. I can demonstrate if you take this flex out. I can go back to the preview and see they're no longer on 2 columns. So the flex allows this call to action element to come up here on the side and create a second column, or really just puts both elements on the same row. Okay, so let's go ahead and comment that back out, or uncomment it. And we have our 2 columns again. Okay, so the main goal here was to put the image on the right side. So because our image comes first, and that's how we want it in the single column view for smaller screens, we can't just move the HTML, because if I moved the image HTML after the call to action HTML, the call to action would then be on top for this view. So what we want to do is use the flex direction reverse CSS, row reverse. So this will just reverse the order of the elements in the display. And sure enough, so we have the text on the left side like we want it, and the image on the right side. Let's move on to our skills section. So our skills section right now, I would say there's a lot of white here, and it would be nice to break up the skills section. So let's go ahead and give it a background that differentiates it from the hero section. And if you see in the preview here, you can see in the background of our nav bar, there's this really light gray. So if we go back to our styling hooks, somehow I clicked out of that, you can scroll down and find the neutral. So this background gray is the neutral color. So if we set our background to our skills section to neutral, it'll map up and look like the background behind the nav bar and also the background strip behind our footer down here. So let's go ahead and use that to set the background. So we're going to grab the variable name here and go to our about section. I'm sorry, the skills section. And if you remember, we put the outer container to limit the size already. So we'll reuse that selector to set a background. So background color, bar, and that styling hook with the neutral background. So let's go ahead and deploy this, kind of see what that looks like. Oh, we have another conflict. Must have tweaked something in the experience builder. Okay. And if we refresh experience builder, we should see a background on our skills section. Okay, so there's a background. I would say it would be nice, since we have a radius on a lot of things here. Let's put a radius on this this corner. And also we're a little cramped on the sides here. So I think some padding on the sides and maybe even the bottom around our cards would look a little nicer. So let's go ahead and add that. So first border radius, do our 5 pixels. And then let's add some padding to all aspects of it. So let's go ahead and just add let's try 20 pixels. Let's go a little more aggressive here. Okay, back to our experience builder. Okay, that's looking a little better. Yeah, got some more space. I like that. I think we can leave that section alone. Now let's move on to the About Me section. Looks like we've got a little bit of, see, this text is maybe a little small. The text we want to target here is in paragraph elements. So let's just go ahead and do a paragraph selector under H1 selector. And we'll set the font size to 18 pixels, just slightly larger than standard. And one thing I'm noticing, there's a little bit of an offset here. I believe this is because we added a margin for the single column view to separate the image from the top of the paragraph. So let's go ahead and reset the margins for the larger screen size, since we already have a media query in here. So for our text container, I believe that's where we're setting margin. Yeah, we have a text container margin of 10 pixels. Let's go ahead and set that margin to 0 for our larger. Just 0, not 0 pixels. 0, 0, no matter what the unit. And deploy that. Okay. Back to Experience Builder. Refresh. That looks like that lines up a little bit better. Text is a little bigger. Maybe the margin here could be increased, that might look a little nicer. So let's go ahead and go back. One little tweak. This is what CSS is all about. All these little tweaks. And let's give the text container a left-right margin. Let's go ahead and set it at maybe 15 pixels. Not sure if that's too aggressive. Let's look at that in local preview first. Oh, let's go find our About Me component. Yeah, that looks nice. I like that. Okay, we'll deploy one last time, and I think we can move on. Okay. Refresh one last time. Oh, it's local development server. Experience builder. Okay, yeah, that's looking better. Now, one last step. We have this empty footer down here that's part of the build your own theme, the LWR build your own theme. So let's go ahead and just add some text in there to make it look like it it belongs. So let's go ahead, throw a text box down there. Give it a second to catch up. There we go. And let's say this site built using Lightning Web Components running on Lightning Web Runtime. Throw that in the center, maybe italicize it. That might be a little large. Let's go for a smaller heading. At this point, I kind of have everything in place and all styled. Let's go ahead and retrieve those changes into a Visual Studio Code and do one last push up to GitHub. So let's go to the terminal window here and SF project, retrieve, start. And that pulled down all of our changes in Experience Builder. Let's go to our source control tab, add a message, final styling to portfolio site components. And we'll just commit and push and stage all of the changes. I hope you enjoyed this series on Lightning Web Components, the Lightning Web Runtime, and Experience Cloud sites. Stay tuned for future videos where I add functionality to this portfolio site.